Genres can be quite diverse and difficult to talk about in different media texts, and horror is no different. Today I'll be attempting to analyse two completely different pieces of art, The Shining and Luigi's Mansion, and comparing to see how they abide by the codes and conventions that most games and movies follow. The Shining is a horror film made by Stanley Kubrick. It follows the Torrance family as the father, Jack, finds the opportunity to caretake a skiing hotel when it's closed during the winter, in which he brings his wife, Wendy, and his son, Danny. As the film goes on, we see the hotel's not what it all seems to be, which sends Jack down a spiral of mental health decline. It's a pretty simple setup to be fair, but not to a fault, with the following game having somewhat of a similar setup. The first Luigi's Mansion is an action-adventure game developed and published by Nintendo, which involves Luigi exploring a mansion, no way, trying to free Mario from King Boo. Both Luigi's Mansion and The Shining take place in a secluded area, and both use this concept and run with it. While they both have quite similar setups, the tone and actual progression are completely different. In 2000, the game was first revealed as just a tech demo for the newly announced GameCube, which showed off the system's graphics capability. When playing the game, you can see all these lighting effects and dust along the pretty impressive graphics at the time. They're pretty dated now. The game was later revealed again as a full-fledged flagship launch title for the GameCube. Up until this point, every Nintendo system has released with a Mario title to boost its sales, and while this was a Mario title, it didn't really feel like one, with a much lower tone and environments. Kubrick previously directed Barry Lyndon, which according to Wikipedia it was a highly visual period film about an Irishman who attempts to make his way into the British atrocity. Unfortunately, even though it was a technical marvel, it sucked. After this, he moved on to his next movie when he realised he should probably actually make money this time. Also, psychological horror was popularised in the previous decade, which he used as the front-running subgenre in The Shining. I just want to first mention that Luigi's Mansion use of camera is pretty cool in this game. When playing the game, it sort of feels like the camera is in a position of a kid playing in their dollhouse, and it makes it feel unique in what's otherwise a basic camera angle. Another part of the game I would like to point out is the setting of the game, particularly the mansion itself, but also Egad's lab. Almost all the environments feel very grim and dark for a kid's game. Doesn't mean it's scary, especially when Luigi first enters the mansion. The Shining's Overlook Hotel is a great place to start in this film. The setting here is perfect for psychological horror, as the hotel is intended, by the filmmakers of course, to be confusing and maze-like so every corner becomes unpredictable from the audience rather than a boring and easy to guess film. The shots in this are perfect for the type of film it is. The movie's long takes really get unsettling, where there is constant suspense and build-up in its scenes that can become very uncomfortable for the audience in a good way. The Shining may have not been the first psychological horror, but has become one of the most iconic movies in recent memory. The Shining uses the genre popularized by Fizio in the 1960s, and looking at what became before, it silently feels like a revolution in the horror genre. Things like his long takes or screenplay, what I mean is how the characters act differently from other horror films, like actually being smart, are good examples of how this movie can stand on its own. And even though it has fictional elements, Jack's downward spiral is relatively grounded and can happen to anyone. Luigi's Mansion isn't a horror game, unless you're a child, and isn't really scary, but its sense of isolation and darkness to build tension are commonly used in horror texts, which complements Luigi's scared personality and overall lighter tone that the game has. For The Shining, while the narrative and plot are mainly inspiration from the novel and Stanley's own personal experiences, or the author of the original book, the idea that shapes the film, mainly in the genre the movie became, are from the movie Psycho. Psycho comes after a long period of using things like monsters and atomic beings, reflecting real-world events at the time like the Cold War, and changed horror films into movies seen in the coming decades. Luigi's Mansion has a simple narrative, and it comes down to the Mario franchise and Nintendo themselves, with Nintendo wanting to push a simple narrative expressed through the gameplay like we see in the game. The narrative is structurally pretty similar to normal Mario games. Save the damsel from the big bad guy, in this case Mario and King Boo fit those roles. This is what Mario games have been like since the NES days. Since these games aren't known for their amazing story, they are known for their fun and involved gameplay. Both of these texts are actually really similar in the engagement, consumption, and reception. Both texts have received cult followings over the years, with both audiences loving their respective texts heaps, due to probably the reception of their at the time of their releases, with both texts garnering mixed and lukewarm receptions. In The Shining's case, it felt like a very slow film that was steering too far from the source material, according to critics, while Luigi's Mansion felt underwhelming because of it being a launch title that didn't live up to the expectations set from games in other console launches at the time. One example I want to pull from in The Shining is Danny running through the maze to get away from Jack. In this scene, Danny does something that the victims in horror movies usually avoid: actually be smart for once. His resourcefulness in this one scene is just one example of how this movie steers from the normal horror tropes and sees Danny outsmart Jack by changing around his footprints in the snow to trick his father. Seeing as this isn't what would happen in a normal horror movie, audiences are most likely to be subverted in their expectations, in a good way of course, and become more interested. Luigi hasn't really had a personality before in any previous game, so seeing that this game gives him a lot of the character that he's known for is evident of its uniqueness. If Luigi wasn't always scared and timid throughout the campaign, it simply wouldn't be as good and would make this game a lot more boring to me.
After delving deeper, I can now say that I fully recommend both Luigi's Mansion and The Shining, as they are both brilliant pieces of texts that don't overstay their welcome. Thank you for watching.